Right, we just had some disconnection issues there from both ends, mine and with Jeff, so I'm hoping now we are back in track. Just wait for everybody to connect back up and we will start again. Hello, thank you for joining back. We lost some connection. Obviously we've got a storm in the UK and I don't know whether that was affecting just my connection, but hopefully Jeff has sorted his connection out at his end as well. I'm just going to invite him back. Hi Jake. Hi everyone, we're just getting back on track after we lost connection. So I'm just inviting Jeff back now. Hello Ecuador.
Are we back, Mark?
You're back and it looks really, really crisp and good quality now.
It's a different setting. I'm going to meander with Carlos into the greenhouse. This is the workbench area. So we'll try again and hopefully we'll maintain the feed. It might be from your end weather-wise, but in addition, instead of the bird like last week, I've got a cat here and he may be hogging the show too. So we'll see, wait and see.
Everybody's saying it's much better both ends, so fantastic.
Let's stay to the left, stay to the left, stay left. Stay left here. I'm going to the very end. You can stay here. I'm going back there. All right, so can you hear me or see what you see now?
We can see lots of plants, anthuriums, alocasias, and we can hear you fine. Well, I can.
Well, good. In that case, Carlos will find me gradually back where I'm standing. We'll try to film. These are all bench tops. And so nothing is on the ground in the greenhouses here. And that's by design. And think of airflow and where temperatures are. I'm right now in Miami. Okay, so what happens is here it's 82 Fahrenheit, and I had to do my math from last week's inability to talk with you about Celsius, but it's just a little under 28 for you. So this is mid-February. It's the dead of our winter. It's very different than what you see, but nevertheless, things at the ground level get their coldest, the warmest air moves to the top, and we stratify. Even in a greenhouse, there are conditions that make this unique compared to the conservatory we were in last week. And then out in the garden itself, there's no protection other than the canopy of trees and things. So this is the most controlled setting we have. And
I've lost the audio from you. Has anyone else? Oh, we're back. We're back.
You lost the audio. You lost the audio.
No, I've got you back now.
Okay, good. Yeah, it was just a brief phone call that was trying to come in, and I don't know who's calling me here now, but we're not going to be picking up. So anyways, Carlos pans around back to me, and then on my other side, I'm trying to give the people who are viewing an idea that I grow more than anthuriums, I promise you. And they're all tropical ornamentals. And so lots to choose from. And most of this comes from the tops and the middle ranges and canopies and trees. It doesn't grow at the ground level. The ground level in rainforest is usually nutritionally poor and is so dark as to make light not as available as elsewhere in the trees. So the other things, of course, trees provide is great ventilation. If you hear there's some fans in the background, it's what keeps us cool. And we'll talk a little bit about not only light, but also the impact of that light from sunlight on generating heat and how do you dissipate the heat so we don't cook the plants. I'm going to keep moving around now as Carlos, also pans left and sort of try to show you maybe some more things featuring anthuriums. But it's us
people are very excited at the moment with what they're seeing. They can't believe their eyes.
Oh, really? Well, we're going to have to impress them then, because if their eyes like that, they might love where I'm going to stand now, since most people think of me through anthuriums. But here's a different setting here. And again, the main thing is the things that you'll see here are, I can't just say successfully grown, they're big. And they're big because they've been sustained for many years. That's really our goal. So I'm bringing this up because whether things like the typical magnificum, this being Michelle, Walkerianum, this is actually one that's Zara, which is, well, here's a red. I don't know if you can see that peeking through, but these all evolve And
So the
so
Zara is very dark in foliage, but with that sort of beautiful red veining and red underneath as well, yeah?
it's dynamic. As the newest leaves expand, these tend to stay red longer than most. And if, in fact, part of something that may have had red, but in a green leaf, an average green like this color green, was
Hmm.
part of it, it wouldn't perhaps contrast with the veins as handsomely as it does. So the breeding of looking for different ways to express color, vein contrast, that's just part of it. And we touched on this a little bit last week. We touched on how when a hybridizer breeds, you're also breeding for the actual vigor of the plant. How easy is it to grow? How
Yeah.
tolerant is it of heat, cold, drought, too much water? So I don't try to grow the plants that are the hardest for me to grow. Life's too short. So what you're seeing are things that, at least through the settings that we have, that are actually quite appealing to anthuriums in general. What you're seeing is sort of testament to the method, in that we have plants that have sustained the trials of natural occurrences for the last, well, 30, 40 years. So I'm going to move even a little further if Carlos wants to
Yeah.
pan over one way or the other again, and I'll get out of range of the camera and go to one more spot. If people liked what they saw there for some larger plants, I'll tell you a plant I don't commercially carry or really want to breed. It's just too big. Sometimes it's better to have smaller plants. And so now, as Carlos comes in here, you'll see something that people are familiar with that's been growing here for a few years, Veitchii.
Yeah.
And there are
People
very few
shouted that
things.
out in the back.
What's that?
People shout. They spotted that straight away, and they were commenting the
Ah,
beach guy.
well, maybe it's a good place for us to sort of wrap up there, because other things that are more rare and people who are collectors see, there's a belt of force here, or over there, there's this, Black Widow. These aren't things I necessarily release, but to be able to grow them because they are showpieces, um,
Yeah.
is again something that's real nice, in particular about living here. Now, this greenhouse may look very big, it's not huge, but you all have the confines of dealing with the reality that the plants you have are going to get bigger, and they are going
Yeah.
to grow right out of the size of your 10 by 10, or maybe more than that, mylar tents. So sometimes selecting a plant not to be like this, but smaller. There's a plant back over there, and I'm pointing behind the Veitchii leaf, with really beautiful markings. Again, it's not dark, it's green. But that plant back there that will be released fairly soon is Anthurium Brielle, named in honor of a friend of mine's daughter.
Did you
Is a
say
size
Brielle
2,
or Brielle?
Brielle with a B. That
B,
plant
Brielle.
I find to be very satisfying, because the leaf that you see there on top is about as big as it's going to get. It's only
Yeah.
about 10 inches wide by 12 inches deep, and yet it holds those markings, nice crystalline patterns in there. It's in medium green and very distinct from a lot of the other hybrids, but a hybrid should have a place because it fits. Now, that's not necessary color, but size too. So that's a good example between Veitchii and Brielle there. Not of extremes, but this Veitchii is getting to be a little extreme that way. So what I'm going to do now, I wanted a chance to share this with you as sort of saying, yeah, this is what, goals are of people who grow to sustain things, get them big and splendid. But I wanted to spend, if we can, for this session compared to the last, more of a hands-on time where we can actually work with some of the plants and see how that evolves. Is that all right with you?
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
All right,
And
so we're going to
just
move out to a work best. Go ahead. We can
I
talk
was just
as the camera moves.
super fantastic. It's just for the people watching. So we're going to go and have a bit of a treat now and see some techniques and things like that. But if you have any questions, please use the question tool, because it allows me to load them up, and then we can sort of share them out, and I can ask Jeff those questions, or Dot Block those questions. So it's really helpful if you use that, and let's enjoy what we've got the rest of the live on. Cheers.
Okay, I'm going to change my glasses because I'm going to a shady area. If
What's
you
that one in
hear,
the middle? Sorry, I'm like a child in a toy shop.
well, maybe you'll hear also a cat. That's static, and He's going to be jumping up on the table, I'm sure, and I'll have to move him away. But it's sort of like what Peaches was doing last week. Are you seeing this all right? Because I know
Yeah,
our
we can see you
Wi-Fi
clearly, and we can
connection
see
for
your
you is
work,
pretty
Ben.
good. Wonderful. I pulled some things out, including my cheat sheet here. So we have a certain time limit like we did last week to be finished inside of an hour. And you see, I told you. All right, you know what? I'm going to have to move you elsewhere. Static, say hello and goodbye.
Hi.
Remember, we're outside now, not where the bird was last week. And as a result, for that reason, the bird last week and the cat, of course, don't mix in the same setting, birds and cats.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things that you have to be concerned about as people on your side of the pond particularly knew hundreds of years ago. Good ratters, okay?
Yeah.
So we don't have as much of a problem with that. Anyway, listen, I pulled some things together, and I wanted to point out, I pulled out a few plants here that I wanted to address this session on the basis of being able to successfully grow the plants before we get into breeding and things, because if you can't grow them to sustain them, you're not going to get anything like you saw in the big greenhouse there. And overall, considering the investment that these plants now are for most people, it would be really nice to sustain it and not kill something if you don't have to. So what I'm saying that is that it's okay to make a mistake and have the plant die once and try again. If you failed at it twice, you know why, and it's just not for you, then for God's sake, quit. Don't go buy a third one. These are not like, $10 plants. So get good at what you're doing. This kind of tutorial hopefully will help people from a basic understanding. And maybe the hands-on part of it will sort of show you how I start off and try to sustain some of those things. So in the meantime, we started off, and I'm going to go right back to what we covered last week about light, then heat, translating to temperature, then the importance of airflow. And then, of course, as we finish with that, we've got to consider water with the airflow and temperature mitigation. So the basic tenets then of light, temperature, water, and airflow were the things we said you got to address. And we're not only going to talk about airflow in essence above the surface of the pod, but actually why it's important to make sure that the air that brings oxygen actually reaches down below the soil line to roots. They depend on it. You want to kill these plants quickly, put them underwater and keep them there and see how long your plant is able to keep going. These are not aquatic plants. They're quite the opposite. They tend to climb up, and I took one plant here. We'll look at it in a little while. This is just a plant we'll take apart a little bit, but as you might be able to see, and I don't know if you can see inside here, their tendency is to climb up and out of the pot. They're reaching. And we saw some last week climbing up an 8-foot wall in my conservatory. So these are
sorry, it's anthurium specific, isn't it? So these tips would be for anthuriums, yeah? Mostly?
You'd be surprised how many plants are not necessarily confined to the forest floors. Plants are, in many of the plants that are collected, including aeroids, can be and are semi-epiphytic, probably anthuriums more than several others. I grow my colocaceae actually underwater for half of the root zone just to keep them constantly wet. So some are more tolerant than others, but they all need oxygen. And if that oxygen underwater is missing and an anaerobic environment, that means without oxygen, then again, that's what a swamp brings, where very few things live there. There are different organisms too that are pathogens, that are actually disease causing, not only in plants, but in humans. Aerobic means with oxygen. Those organisms tolerate oxygen. Those are not the toughest ones sometimes to deal with. The toughest ones sometimes are anaerobic, the ones that do not need oxygen and thrive in oxygen poor or deficient areas. That's what gangrene is in people. And you know what? I've got a lot of doctors out there, seemingly, who are following me. And even after the last course, a few contacted me and said, I'm a doc. I really like the way you presented this. Well, for a following with docs, I got a little more maybe into the chemistry last week with molecules and things like that. So forgetting to be highbrowed with that kind of detail, I want the general listener today to think a minute about how the doctors that you know should know something about sustaining plants, because it makes them better at knowing how to sustain human patients. And
Yeah,
think about
exactly.
this a moment. Mark, when you go into your doctor's office and you see in that waiting room a sick or dying plant, without really saying anything, what might you think about that doctor?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Can he look after me
Yeah,
if he can't look after the plant in the room?
right, exactly.
He would
So,
be.
so I think that the physicians who like plants, not only me, but there's many of us, they
Mm.
have a different understanding of how to nurture life forms. So let's move on, okay? Because what I did here is I brought out a few plants. Many of them are in pots about so big there. We call them accelerator pots. But it's a good time actually to look at pots to start, maybe, because many people who get
Oh,
plants want to know. Are you
that's a
saying
really good
something
thing.
there?
'Cause somebody just asked about types of pots that you use.
Yeah, well, here you go. Look, let's go through a few minutes. I'm going to actually move one from here. When this plant gets big enough, I tend to use a pot like this. Why? Because I want to grow bigger plants. It's obviously not the 5-inch plant that most of the plants coming from my hybrids will be offered in, but it has some things in comparison and similar. To begin with, these particular pots, and I'm going to start perhaps with the small ones that most people need when they start, don't only have holes on the bottom for drainage. They actually, if you were to see closely, and the camera won't pick this up, but there are slits that follow up the sides of the pot, going up at least 20% of the way. And what that allows is, even if the plant is sitting on something that doesn't allow good drainage, the
Right.
roots can not only allow the water to drain, but the air. That's what also can get in to keep the roots oxygenated. That's what air brings, oxygen. So a particularly well draining pot, think of not only from the perspective of getting rid of water, but letting air in. That's what epiphytes need. Things that climb up in trees are not accustomed to being smothered, okay? And the more you can open up the roots and expose them that way, the happier generally they'll be. Here's another thing though. Here's a pot that's just a little smaller, about a 4-inch pot, but it's the same manufacturer in this case by the way, I am not going to reference any manufacturers in today's talk. That's not for me to do. I'm not here to promote anybody, whether it's a fertilizer or a pot or anything like that. I want to express the concepts though. So this pot also, if it's lying on the ground, has slits on the sides that allow water escaping, oxygen in, really important. But what do you notice about this one? It's not actually white and solid, it's opaque. And when many plants, especially orchids and phalaenopsis orchids, for those of you familiar, the roots actually have a certain potential to photosynthesize, to actually use the heat to get its energy. That's really important. So sometimes where you use a pot like this, the roots can actually, as they go to the sides of the pot, get enough sunlight through this filtering of the opaque plastic to where it can help the root development as well. So I'm pointing
Do
that
they
out
also have
because not all,
chlorophyll in them?
they can. Yes, roots can
Yeah.
have active metabolizing chlorophyll. Doesn't mean they're green, but it means they
Mm.
have the ability in some cases to grow when better exposed to light. And I'm referencing Phalaenopsis that way. These pots, which may seem like the best solution based on what I just said, open on the sides, not unlike this. The difference here is that most anthurium leaves, if they poke through one of these little holes, they get to be almost impossible to pull back out because these are
Yeah.
tiny little slots. And when you do that, you wind up having to cut them. Not so with a pot that has wider opening grooves, so that when you pick them out and you sort of wiggle it out, the roots, and you'll know how far out they are, can sort of come out to put into something else or to transfer it without having as much root damage. So my comment about all of these pots are that they promote excellent drainage and they also promote oxygen getting in. So what happens after you move up, say, from a 5-inch pot to just seemingly a 6-inch pot? There's a big difference in volume because, as
Yeah.
you can see from the size of just 5-inch versus 6, there's 3 times or more volume, just about in this big pot than this. That's space for those roots in the plant to develop. So I don't grow them in larger pots than the 6-inch before moving them into particular pots that I would hold on to for hybridizing purposes. And so some of the plants that are through here, if Carlos wants to pan again, you'll be able to see are plants in the larger containers like I've shown you, and you know how nicely they do there. By the way, one last
Yeah,
comment on lights.
the larger pot that you just showed us with the little grooves in there, that looks really interesting. So you said that helps. Obviously, it's got airflow capacity capabilities all the way around it, but you just mentioned about a benefit of being able to wiggle them out, and you're not going to get something caught. Whereas the other one looked like more of an aquatic kind of nursery pot or something like that.
Exactly. So again, the brand's not important. This is a company that manufacture these under the name of accelerator pots. But I'm not a spokesman for the company, and so I'm not necessarily endorsing them unless they want to engage me to endorse their product. Then we can talk further. In the meantime, let's get into looking at one of the plants now for the purpose of repotting, which is one of the reasons I pulled this one out. Okay, and what I'd like to show you first is when the plant, and I'll just use this as a catch bucket in the meantime. Hopefully I'll be able to show you the kind of roots. There you go. Okay, first time I pulled it out, but I totally expected the roots to look something like this.
Yeah.
As you can see, the plant has climbed a good 3 inches now, or 4 inches, to the point to where the new leaves are coming out. It didn't start like that maybe a year ago, but you can see all these roots called aerial roots that are looking for something to cling to. It's as much structural as it is nutritional, but these new roots, that's really the support system of your plant for next year. So again.
And is that the telltale sign for you to think, right, I need to repot it because these roots are looking for something?
They are looking for something. Now, when you repot it, you don't have to put it all the way at the top of the pot. In a pot like this, you could sink it halfway down and only put half the media in there. So as the plant grows up, you can add more media without having to take it out and put it in something else. So that's all nice and easy. But in the meantime, when you have a plant like this and you want to put it in another pot, if the roots are not culling, is the word, around to where they've sort of captured and are encasing the soil or the media, then you can take it and just probably put it right down. The roots will go where it's best for them, and they have ways to escape. But sometimes you wait too long, and then those roots are wrapped around and actually encase what you really want to have open up, which is the whole plant to breathe better. So in that case, and let's pretend this was more heavily rooted, I just gently tap away some of the soil to free up the roots so that if I put the plant, as you'll see it then, into the pot and add some more media, and I'll give a comment on media in just a moment.
Yeah, we are
perhaps
questions about what potting medium you use, so I'll whiz those through.
So even knocking some off the bottom, it doesn't have to sit as high as before. When I do this, and I would probably change out this media for others, but there's really nothing wrong with it, then it's sitting lower in the pot, and you can build up around it. Put it in the center, give it a chance to develop equally in different areas, but you can, at this point, as it grows up, add more media to it. So one thing there is what media, and I know that we were just asked about that. And there is no one absolute correct answer. We can pull that all the way out. And the reason I'm bringing it up that way about no one exact answer is that it really is largely determined by how much water you need to dissipate. So if you're in an arid area, you're not tending to use much water, the media, you'd like to hold on to some of that humidity and moisture, because what's happening not only to the leaf, but underground, is that water and the humidity, when you have airflow, and that's the reason also for the holes on the side, let the air get in, actually brings the temperature down a little bit. And that's important when you live in a place like Miami where it's as hot as it is, because the humidity is what actually allows, through evaporation on the leaf or root surfaces, the actual temperature, the feels like temperature, to be lower at the surface of the root or the leaf. So you can actually get away with hotter temperatures in a more humid environment because of what transpiration is doing. So we're talking about things of dew points and heat indices or indexes that you follow in the weather report. It feels like temperature. It's why if you have a ceiling fan going in on and you're, you know, in a room that's really 78 degrees, it might feel like 72 with the humidity at a certain point.
Yeah.
So rather than telling you specific media suggestions, I'll just say these are all measurable numbers. The humidity and the temperature, and I'm going to give you Fahrenheit just because they're the same number. If you could give these plants around 70% humidity and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can look up what that comes into Celsius, generally that's where it feels comfortable for you. Guess what? Generally that's where it would feel comfortable for your anthuriums too. So those are some basic ballpark numbers. Sure, it can vary from 70 to 80, both for temperature and humidity. You get down to 60, 50% humidity, watch out for the plant drying out perhaps more than it would be used to from where it's naturalized from. Remember, these plants are not coming from the UK. They're not even native to Miami. These are coming from tropical rainforested areas generally that have plenty of humidity. Certainly they're not growing at the very tops of canopies in full sun. But the light that they get, the breeze, the humidity, all you're trying to duplicate is the native environment from which these were bred from, and it's not here. It's in the wild for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So that's the understanding of where light meets humidity and heat. The airflow part sort of having been covered with the holes in the sides of the plant. So again, when you move things into other pots, it's an opportunity to look at it for some of the nutritional things. And again, not product selling or hawking, but that says Mag Pro, forget the brand, magnesium. It's just what we talked about last week. The central, what they call cation that's in chlorophyll that allows it to function. This is a bag of magnesium sulfate, Epsom salts, cheap as it comes. You can
Yes, I've heard other people use Epsom salts in their plants. I don't do that. It'd be great to see you use it in this session here.
Well, it's not a primary nutrient like you would think of as nitrogen for plants to grow. The plants really grow and get their energy not from fertilizers. I mean, yeah, I've got some time-release Nutricoat or Osmocote type things here, but that's not what plants need. Have you ever seen a plant out in its native environment that's ever been fed, and yet it could look gorgeous because it's naturalized there? And so what really the plant needs to be fed, in the sense that it's the way it gets its energy, is the right light. And I wanted to make a point of that today, not only in this session, but for people, if they want to see a post that I posted a few minutes before coming live with you today, I showed a picture of a plant. Now, I'm even going to show you which plant it is. Can Carlos, you see this leaf right here? Okay, can everybody see that leaf?
Yeah, that's the one I was getting excited about because I can't work it out.
Good. well, good. You're not supposed to, because one of the things that I do as a hybridizer, and people sometimes are cautious about, well, what are you breeding for? And let's keep focused on that one for a little while, is I'm giving away things, not giving, or I used to give away loads of plants, but people thought that what they were getting was that the pinnacle of development. No, I didn't tend to give away those plants that I wanted to develop further. And I generally keep not one generation ahead of what I release. I keep 2 generations ahead. So I know that people would like to, catch up or maybe surpass, but the fact is that's a next gen plant coming there. And you see the thing that's different about it, and I have several like this, is actually the markings of the veins. They're much wider. I remember years ago seeing a plant that was very different than the standard Anthurium clarinervum I grew, called King of Clarinervum, and it was the ultra expression of the white extending from the midline where all that crystalline reflection happens, and it was stunning. So I have several lines of my breeding that's pushing the veining to be, instead of pencil thin, to be more pronounced and widespread. But it's that white part that is reflective. There are little cells on the surface of these anthurium leaves that allow the plant to actually reflect back that sheen, that glistening, that shimmering. And the reason that's important is that shows up very differently under different lights. Now, there's another leaf that's just to the left of the one that Carlos is on, that he was just touching and handling. That leaf, if you pull back a little to see the full leaf, there the shape of the leaf is different. Now we're getting elongated, and if anybody wants to know, it's partly because the magnificums that I enjoy so much for color and leaf contrast is not compatible for breeding with Walkerianum, the epitome of long, narrow leaf. So what do? You select 4 over generations, longer leaves. Some may be wide in their veining, some may be more narrow. But these are different ideas that go into the future of which plants I would like other people to enjoy. I enjoy them. I don't release them unless I know they perform according to really what I am, a lazy gardener. So if it's not an easy plant to grow, chances are I'm not going to release it. And so these are plants then that are sort of coming. As a matter of fact, the plant that's back here, how did you get out of there? We had this little guy in one of our greenhouses, but he found a way to sneak out, and I think I know how. So while Carlos is looking at that, I'm going to take my cat here and put him someplace else for a moment, okay?
So hopefully you can still hear us. The plant that's in the middle, have you actually announced when that is likely to come out, or has it been given a name?
Okay, so I'm all done with that. So as we get back and focused, what I wanted to do is sort of go from the growing part, like we just took a plant out and things like that, and maybe it's some of the plants here on the left, because they're all different, and not the one we worked with before, but perhaps these other 3 here. Obviously, the markings on these plants are different. This is the one I said stays small, Anthurium Brielle. We have not released this one yet. That's one of several of the plants that we had shown once starting in September as Black Widow. But again, the markings, the vein markings on that plant seemingly are a recessive trait. What does that mean? It means when you do seedlings of them, not that many come up like that. So an extra generation of pushing out those veins would have more of the seedlings coming up if the right parents are matched. And then finally, the first plant in front here, as nice as it looks now, is kind of special to me. It's a plant that's named after my wife, Michelle, and that's the very plant that we entered a few weeks ago into the Tropical Plant International Expo, TPIE show. And that plant then was kind of manhandled a bit at the show. So some broken leaves, and even somebody who came along and quite unscrupulously cut one of the flower spikes of it. You can see that this is a breeding plant. It's got 3 spikes on it now. Those will be the next generation of plants coming out that share my wife's name, Michelle. So having done that then, let's push that back a little bit so we can maybe close in a little more. And see, here's a good example with that Black Widow of a seedling that looks like it may have promise, but needs a while longer to grow out to see what it really looks like. And what you see there expressed then are the parents and the grandparents and the great-grandparents that we really may not know going back that far, but certainly a recessive gene is one that is not necessarily expressed in most of the offspring seedlings. So let's talk about seedlings a moment, because it's a process. And this doesn't happen necessarily by itself, but it starts with pollination. So when a plant has a flower, and this is probably the closest one, which is actually right now, it's hard to see from where your camera is, but I can see little glistening dew points throughout each of the little bumps there, and that's the female when it's in its receptive stage. And I know some people who will go along with the finest little paintbrush and things and find another plant which is shedding some pollen. Again, this same flower will in a few weeks lose the ability to be bred with because the female will no longer be receptive, but the same flower will then, and only then, start to show that it has pollen, and you'll see the pollen form on it. So to have multiple plants or the same plant with multiple bloom spikes allows you to take the pollen from one, and then you can brush it on with the paintbrush you want. But if this flower here, for instance, had pollen on it, I can show you the unceremonious way I'll do it. I'll take my fingers and I'll sometimes do that, and then I'll rub it right over this. And a few months later, guess what I got? Something that looks more like this. And these are now the actual little berries, they're called. But inside each is a tiny little one or two seeds. I don't know if you can actually see.
Can Carlos
in my hand? Well, you know what? It's hard to see this way, but let's say that these seeds here, and this is a good close-up. Can you see that
Yeah.
like I can?
Yeah, we can see it.
Mark?
Yeah,
Hello?
we can see it. Absolutely fine.
1 second. Can you see that?
Yes. Hopefully you can still
Okay.
hear me.
Okay. Carlos didn't realize he had hit the camera and pressed the volume. So you can see these berries. These berries, I'll clean them off just like that without wanting to break the whole flower, because those berries can continue coming out of this for several days or even weeks. And this is a relatively small plant, but yet with a nice big bloom spike, which means it's older. A plant like the Michelle you saw over here a moment ago can produce a flower, and this is old now. It has a few little berries left, but this in the last few days is a big flower spike that yielded over 500 seeds. And so in a commercial sense, what do you do with 500 seeds? You can sow them in places, but the first and most important thing is not the berries that you see here, but the actual seeds that are inside. And cleaning off the fruit from the berries is kind of not just a ritual thing, but something that I regard as being sort of important, because the berry is there to attract something to come and eat it. Rats will eat these things right off of the flower. And so they do so because the berry has certain sugars in it, like most fruit do. So
Yes.
the way that you reveal the seed from the berry fruit around it and the skin, lots of ways to do it. Some people do it in water and separate out just by pushing up against the side of a glass. I tend to use strainers like this because I actually catch the seeds. If it's in my greenhouse, I don't let them fall right through the greenhouse bench, and I know it's here. So even though I've taken off a little handful here, I want to show you just what's inside those seeds, those berries a moment, as I start to work with them. So I'm going to quickly take.
They look like pomegranate seeds.
Yeah, a little bit. They're generally two colors. But let me do something here a minute just to clean them off a little bit, so they make it easier for me to do nothing more than simply move my fingers against them. Because when I start to do this, and if you can see, you see the little white round things coming out? Those are actually the seeds themselves. You see the difference between where the pulp is, the dark versus the seeds?
Yeah.
If I
So you sort of push it around in there to break the fruit up to release the seed out.
Very gently, Mark, and you don't need to abrade the seeds like some people do for certain really durable seeds. These are somewhat more fragile. But if I take that now and I'm going to hose this out of camera range for just a second, just to show you what is yielded by that and how quickly we can actually gather some seeds for sowing.
And then if you can, somebody's just asked roughly, what are the timelines from pollination to it making the fruit?
As little as a couple months to as much as perhaps half a year. And different ones, different times of the year, different environments can bring that in that range generally. There are some exceptions, even including Clarinervum, that I found just to be too slow and it wasn't worth my time, and it yields very few fruit and seeds. But as you can see there's probably over 50 seeds there, and it took me about 30 seconds to clean all those off. So what do you do next with that? And that's where Carlos can move back a minute so I can just have some space. Next, you got to sow the seeds. And where you sow them in, a lot of choices. You can do it in a pot. Just put some of your mix here if you want, so long as it's good draining. And you could sow those seeds right on the surface. Or if you wanted some more, and I told you some of these can have hundreds of seeds in a big flower, then you would take some out and gently sprinkle them in a uniform setting like this. If you notice, this particular media, since we're talking media before, has some extra perlite and things to ensure really good drainage. The fact is, the bottom of this container is open, so it's never going to hold more dirt than it should. And it's only about 2 inches deep. So as a little plant comes up, the trick is when are you going to be able to wiggle it out and put it into an individual pot? So
Yeah.
this is a way to do what's called a community pot or a community tray. And that's important. We also have another way of dealing with things in something called plugs. And this is more for my commercial plants, and this is why they come out so good. Part of it. This is a peat and other component pre-molded thing that's injected into this little tray, and it sits in trays. This one has 72 of those plugs. But I want to point out something to you. Does anybody know online? Let's see who's the first to answer. This is actually a tool. It's a tool that's popularly known as, and we'll see if anybody answers in before I say it, if anybody really knows, a dibber, D-I-B-B-E-R, funny little name. But what I use it for is there's a little hole point here that for anthurium seeds, they like to be surface sown. They don't need to be buried very deep. And so I'll just put one of those little seeds in the little hole I just made as a depression, so it doesn't float away if there's a little water on it. I want it to go center so it sends the roots down, the leaf up, and then it's a real pretty little seedling that is easy to take from a tray like this and put it into the next step, which in this case would be a 5-inch pot. That's the standard that Nurturing Nature Anthuriums likes to work with. And by the time this standard plant gets to be having no less than 3 leaves that are representative of that particular hybrid, and having roots that reach either or the sides of the pot or the bottom, then it's ready to go to market. So at that point, we're confident that we have a vigorous growing plant representative of the parents. And I said parents plural. That's a very important consideration, because when people order a plant and they see one picture of one of the parents and they know it's mixed with another parent, the fact is those kikis, those seedling offsprings, have genetic traits coming from both of the parents. Now, in that sense, if I told you that this is a plant that we posted a reel of just last week, and there is the Michelle here, and I put these two together and pollinated one with the other, if you had to take a risk on a given plant, how ugly do you think that seedling's likely to be?
So I guess you're gonna have to wait, aren't you, and see how they develop, and then do you pick the best ones out of that? Or?
You know, the best one is all relative, because you figure that the traits are going to be expressed in some way between the both parents, and that's an important point. So if we're trying to express a trait that now is a longer leaf, a narrow one like I showed you, or the one with the wider veins, these are all gradual ways we work into this. And I'm just going to caution Carlos, if you shake the camera, the alarm's going to think I fell down with the camera, and it's going to call the fire department to say I've hurt myself. That's one of the features in the iPhones now, that it's sometimes troublesome. Anyway, I want to just sort of wrap up, since we are getting near end, to show you a little bit about those people who do want to get more into the breeding. And let's say that the timing isn't just right, because breeding, as in plants, is the same as with people, okay? Timing is everything. So if you have a plant that has the receptive female, but you don't have male pollen that you want to match with it at that time, you're stuck. On the other hand, my cat's getting out of greenhouse places and I have no idea how he's doing it. But on the other hand, if you have plants that can be tricked with little tricks into being pollinated with having pollen stored, that's helpful. So one of the things that we do, and I'm going to have to look at my cat here for just one more second as Carlos maybe pans over here. Good. Okay. Come here, honey.
Don't worry, I'll ask that question, make believes.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know how my cats are getting out of the places I put them, but
We're just waiting for the audio to come back again. So there is a lot of questions that people have been sending through. I am going to try and answer this, get through some of these towards the end, and some of them are multiples of the same, so I'll bundle them all up. We can hear you again.
Okay, good. Yeah, it just comes out a second when we move around. All I want to finish up saying is This may look like a test tube out of a doctor's lab. It's not. You can buy these online. Little easy test tube. If you were to have a flower that is shedding pollen, what I'll generally do is I'll take advantage, use a funnel, put the funnel here so that I can actually secure whatever I'm catching, and brush, usually with a more coarse brush, and I have one here, the pollen I want off of the leaf, like with something like this, into the funnel, captured in the little plant. Take that off. Maybe even put, and you know these little packets that come with prescription medicines, the anti thing,
Yeah, silica.
silicon, right? Exactly. Put one in there, cap it off, write what it is on the plant. You will forget, and then I'll probably simply take a little piece of aluminum foil, wrap up the test tube, throw it in my freezer, and tell the kids it's not dessert.
So what's the benefit of the foil wrapping?
I just think it keeps the container a little cooler, even when you're taking it out, so that in the transfer process, even from the time you remove it from a freezer, it's not sitting around. I just think it's extra insulation.
Yeah.
That's it. Because the key is, at that point, if you're going to store it, cold makes the difference. I don't know if storing for much more than a couple weeks keeps it quite as vital as I would. Nothing beats doing it fresh, right when, as soon as it's exposed. So what does that mean? It means having multiple plants is very helpful to keeping things fresh and being able to get them out fresh. That's really most of what I wanted to cover in today's talk, Mark, as time goes on. You want to throw a few questions at me as we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. I think there's one question, but it's been asked multiple times, so I'm going to try and just wrap them all up into one question. And I think we kind of hit on it on the previous session. So a reminder for people that aren't aware, the other session that we had is recorded. It's available on my Instagram. You can go and refer to it there. But the question is about, how do you know, or where can I go to find out information on which types of anthurium can actually be crossed or hybridized? Because they keep talking and mentioning this word sections, or some sections don't cross.
Yeah, it's more frequently than anything else chromosomal inconsistencies. And the fact is, I don't know. A lot of this gets passed down from people who are knowledgeable. There's people certainly associated with International Aroid Society is one, but really the people who are writing the literature that can be looked up are important. Tom Crowett's been doing this for years. Jay Vanini's been involved with a lot of taxonomic challenges that happen in part from plants that came out of South Florida for years that were never properly identified and given just imaginary names that had very little to do with the true parents. And it was confusing. So what's even more confusing is when somebody makes the effort to try to breed with something that's not compatible with something else. There is no, that I know of, easily accessed repository with that information.
Okay, thank you. And then there's just one other question that somebody's asked about. Are there some anthuriums species that have reddish roots that you're aware of?
Yeah, and several of the plants that I breed with do have, especially the new emerging roots that come out near the leaf base, which sometimes may be red tinged too, that absolutely appear red and orange. It's one of the things that if you look for which of those plants have petioles that resemble it, that's also a little telltale sign that it may have the red in the genetics of it, and sometimes that get expressed. It's one of the things I look for, and I love the colors that come out other than plain old green.
Wow, I didn't realize that the petiole piece could be referenced, or a trait that could be available somewhere else within the plant.
Well, you have a spadix, okay, and a petiole, but generally I'm using plants that I've collected for years, and the Michelle line tends to be more purple, burgundy purple, and the Zara line, which some people have called red crystallinum influence, and I don't know of a registered hybrid that's called red crystallinum, but nevertheless, I accessed plants years ago that featured that red color that I try to use in breeding to express it in some of the other plants that I like. So it's very real, Mark, and so colors are the way I like to see these plants. The Michelle line being more purple in essence, in summary, and the Zara line being more red. I do plan on offering both of those palettes, and as compared to Brielle here, which doesn't do that, stays green. And as you can see, the petiole here is clearly green and not red, not purple or burgundy.
But it's still
So
green with amazing silver veins. And you said it was, and it contains its size to a degree, which is really interesting.
I have another plant that will be likely called Anthurium Wonderful in the future, which is that kind of leaf for colors and palette, green, 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 but regale, huge, huge. And so there's a time and place probably for all of these collectors who want to have all of them. Just be wary of growing out of space in faster than you can imagine if you grow them well, because these will grow quickly if you treat them properly.
Yeah, I'm having that problem right now behind me. I don't know whether you can see me, but I did a picture of a cabinet 7 months ago, and what it's like now, and they're bursting out basically. So yeah, you've got to be wary that they grow massive.
Or you need to buy another cabinet.
I know, right? I've got one last question, which I think is
home.
Yeah, or a greenhouse like what you've got would be fantastic. One last question, which I think is quite generic, and I think maybe lots of people could answer this actually, or provide suggestions. So somebody who has an indoor greenhouse space, so that they've got some greenhouse system, I don't know what it is, it could be a tent or something like what I've got behind me. Do you have any tips that they could have to increase the airflow for that? They only have 2 little fans.
If it's an enclosed space, remember that air that comes in has to have a way to go out. So it's not only a fan, it's a way to change over the air, bringing in air from outside and exhausting it outside. But if it's indoors, chances are you're going to have to realize it's not going to have a glass roof. And as such, you're going to be supplying artificial light. LED lights come in different wavelengths, but people aren't measuring another easy to measure variable of lumens. How bright are you actually providing? These plants, if taken in the right temperature and humidity, can actually take more light than most people who are growing them indoors realize. And so you're matching the plants for light and which wavelengths in particular are helpful. The LED industry now has produced these, which are wonderful because they're cheaper to run and they don't produce as much heat as the previous lines of plants, which were generally heat producing. So the main variable for indoors is consider investing in light. Fans are cheap. And the LED lights, yes, they are, not so cheap as a light bulb you just plug in, but they're worth the while for somebody looking to see what the main problem is with growing indoors. Even as much or more than airflow, without the light to give the plant energy, you're never going to see the results you could.
Yes, super, thank you. So Jeff or Dot Block, I don't know what to call you, I keep calling you both names, but I guess we could wrap it up there, and if I sort of end it by saying thank you for joining on this. It's been absolutely amazing. This will be saved so people can go and refer to it, and if people have questions on the saved post, please ask them, and we'll try to continue to answer questions. Check out the Real Dot Block Instagram, and you've got some other pages as well that people can go and refer and see some information on, which is your Facebook page. And you've also got your website, which is nurturingnature.com.
Thanks, Mark. Last Friday and today was kind of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I think people absolutely loved it. So I would like to thank everybody that joined, and I'll get this one posted up shortly.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.